talk to you and take you on a little bit of a journey from where we've been to where we are today in terms of mentoring and understanding how programs like the Executive Mentoring Program here at UWF, as well as programs focused specifically on women, really can help propel your career. And so to get us started, because I know a lot of you have had some exposure to mentoring, or you're just getting started, I want you to think about, well, who in the past year or two has taken an active interest and taken some action to help me? And I want you to think broadly, not just the people at the university or at your workplace, but also those people in the community. Family members, friends, extended family. You might tick off a handful of names. So I want to keep those names in the back of your mind as I take you on this little journey that we're going to talk about here today. And I want to start with the fact that there's a tremendous amount of literature on leadership, but there's one thing we know very clearly, that you have to have some skills to be a leader, right? You have to bring some individual knowledge and expertise to the table. That's what gets you in the door, and that's often what gets you promoted from your first job. Beyond that first promotion, though, something called social capital has to accumulate, and social capital doesn't exist within the individual. It exists in a network. It's how we build relationships that help us get our jobs done, because none of us work in a vacuum. Most of us work in medium, large organizations where there's a lot of people involved in getting our work done. And so how do you move from having a tremendous amount of human capital to social capital in a way that's effective? Well, here's what the challenge is for women. Okay? When you look at the Fortune 500 and you look up the hierarchy, you're looking at a decreasing proportion of women and minorities as you go up, to the point where when you look at CEOs, 4.6% of women are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. And that statistic sounds bad. Let me tell you how bad it is. It's 23 women. First 3 rows right here. Okay. It's unfortunate that we know so many of these women by name. Mary Barra, GM. Ursula Burns, Xerox. Indra Nooyi, PepsiCo. That's how rare they are, and that's why they get so much attention. So how do we go about changing this dynamics? I'll tell you, it's not that we don't have enough qualified women. We have more women graduating college than men. There are more women in the workforce in their 20s that are succeeding, and actually in some big cities are equivalent to men, and we're still not breaking these numbers down. So where do we go from here? Well, mentoring is one way of working through social capital. And so mentoring has been shown to have all of these benefits, and participating in a program like UWF is one step to accumulating that social capital you need. So what does mentoring do? As a protégé, you're very lucky if you're in a mentoring relationship, because oftentimes people that have a mentor are more likely to be promoted faster. They get more opportunities to begin with. They get higher salaries, and they actually like their jobs more. They're more satisfied. So having a mentor does all these wonderful things for protégés, but just like you saw the video before, it also benefits the mentors, and that's the secret, right? Mentoring is a mutual relationship. So there's benefits in both directions. Oftentimes, people who mentor more are more satisfied at their work as well. They become known as developing others. And furthermore, the organization develops. It creates what's called a developmental culture, where people are helping one another navigate their careers, and it leads to all these wonderful benefits. So where did all of this come from, this idea of mentoring, and why has it become so important to us? It's become ubiquitous in the past 10 years in particular. The word mentor actually comes from Greek mythology. So some of you probably know this. It comes from the Odyssey. When Odysseus went off to fight the Trojan War, he asked Mentor to shepherd young Telemachus into adulthood. Now, the best secret of this story, that many of you probably don't remember, is that mentor was actually the goddess Athena in disguise. Okay? So the first mentor was a woman. Yay. This concept has been around for thousands of years, but it didn't really come to the forefront until the 70s. A researcher named Daniel Levinson wrote a book called Seasons of a Man's Life, because there weren't very many women to write about at the time. And he found that the most successful men had what he described as a mentor helping them in their career. And so his student, Kathy Cram, then did her dissertation on mentoring at work. And this was in the late 70s, early 80s, and the idea of mentoring took off in the workplace as there were lots of women entering the workforce, and Human Resources says, here we go, here's a way we can start to integrate women into the workforce, and that's where the diversity and mentoring programs started to come in. Now, so mentoring's been really a part of the workplace only for the past 30 years. In the 90s, the idea of social networks and social capital started to come into our language more, and now social media means that we can have networks that are just enormous, right? So how does this matter for us as we think about mentoring? I want to take you through a few more things about mentoring that make it really important, and particularly for women. Women need mentors, and they need more than one. And that's because these challenges are sticky challenges. They take a while to work through. One is that lack of access to informal networks. So the trouble with human beings are that we tend to be attracted to people who are similar to us. It's a principle in sociology called homophily. And it just simply means that we're more likely to generate a relationship with someone that is similar to us, that talks like us, that looks like us, that has similar experiences. And those people aren't CEOs of most companies, right? You're lucky if you have a role model in that position. And so because there's a lack of access to those informal networks, what we call sometimes the old boys network, sometimes just interest networks, you also see a lack of role models. The important thing about role modeling is it requires identification. And so something about finding those role models either in or outside of your organization tends to be really important. Second generation bias, unlike what our president here experienced, it's not blatant discrimination. It's an accumulation of resources or lack thereof in the aggregate, the way we expect a leader to communicate, the hierarchy of the organization, the norms we ascribe to leadership. Those are some of the structural barriers that women face, but we also face some perceptual barriers. Okay? It's difficult to learn to be a leader when you don't see a lot of good examples around you. There's a double bind dilemma. That is this idea that Amy Cuddy and her co-authors have put forward that women can be warm, women can be competent, but we often don't see them as both. We expect, stereotypically, women to be warm. And if they're warm, they can't possibly be good at their jobs. Right? So there are all these things in the aggregate that put us at a disadvantage. And the final thing I want to mention is many of us have trouble with cross-gender relationships. There's risks in that. Having a relationship between a more senior gentleman and a younger woman causes all kinds of interesting dynamics. Right? Turns out those can be very successful relationships. It takes longer than 3 months. Right? At the 3-month mark, there's still some discomfort. It takes up to 8 months for those relationships to be at the same level as someone who's more similar to you. So it literally takes more time and more effort to overcome those interpersonal barriers. So given that there's all these challenges, what is the support that we can get from a good mentoring relationship that helps us move forward? Well, the very first thing that we all need is what's called career support, career and instrumental support. And this is what helps get us ahead in our organization. Okay, so it's someone putting your name up for promotion, that's sponsorship, someone coaching you in how to run the next meeting, how to give that big presentation, right? It's someone advocating for you to get that next challenging job. Now within that, there's also this idea of psychosocial support, right? That someone's encouraging you, that they're counseling you, that they're offering their friendship, that they trust you. And finally, that there's some role modeling going on. But this is a lot for any one person to do, right? This is what a traditional mentor did, all of these things. And this is extraordinarily time-consuming. It would be hard for any one person to do all of this. So instead of just looking for that one perfect mentor, which if you have one, that's wonderful. Most of us are never going to have that one perfect mentor. The idea of a developmental network or a board of advisors is that you can distribute those resources across a handful of relationships. That there can be several people providing you combined with the support that you need to move forward in your career. One really important thing about developmental networks is not only that they're with a senior person in the organization, and I would argue that most of you should have a couple of senior people looking out for you, but also that they're with your peers, with people inside the organization as well as outside. Many times, someone outside of your organization is going to ask you good questions that look at things from a different perspective. So having mentors both in and outside is very important. Not only that, my research has shown that those external mentors directly affect our career satisfaction. Right? They're not necessarily affecting how much you get paid, right? But they are affecting how much you're enjoying your work. Okay. So here's a nice picture of what I call a prototypical developmental network. So these are the sort of all the relationships that I want you to be thinking about as people that could fill roles in your developmental network. So first, if you have a mentor here at UWF or beyond, that's great. Right? You are also going to need some leaders, some people ahead of you in the organization that you're working for, who can sponsor you, who can advocate for you, who can help you identify those challenging assignments to move you forward. Peers turn out to be one of the most underutilized resources. Your peers can help you prepare in ways that you haven't probably thought about before. They can challenge you. They can help you rehearse to go approach that more senior person, right? Reverse mentors. So I've done some work on reverse mentoring and found that the mentees who are more senior often learn more from their junior mentors than in the reverse situation. So looking for people that have fresh perspectives and new ideas who might be more junior to you is something I would advocate. Family and friends. Most of us, if you're asked who's impacted your career, how many of you who are married or in a serious relationship would say your spouse? Yeah, it turns out spouses are one of the most frequently cited external mentors that exist. And then industry associates, any organization that you belong to, that you have regular contact with people, even if it's only once a year, these can be great developers for helping you not only find new opportunities, but help you think about possibilities in your current organization. When we think about developmental networks, we basically think about a mentor or developer as a learning relationship. So in that relationship, as long as you're learning something that's helpful for your career, that person is a developer. Early in your career, I often talk to junior people, and many of them cite that they can have 3 to 5 developers helping them move forward. By mid-career, I've got people making lists of 10 to 12 people and upwards of 20 people that they're relying on for their career help. And so thinking more broadly about mentoring also lowers your risk, right? Since all your eggs aren't in one basket with one mentor, many of us are moving around more often. If that person leaves, you still have the resources you need to move forward. Now, a lot of this work comes out of this idea that people are more mobile, our careers are less predictable, and less stable. So having a structure of people around you that can support you as you transition becomes really important. 20 years ago, we used to talk about transitions and learning cycles as 3 to 5 years. Now they're much more close to about 18 months. We see people changing jobs. So when you think about developmental relationships, you can think in 2 ways. One, about the content of the support you're getting, which was that instrumental support, psychosocial support, the role modeling. But another way is about the structure. So now that you've got this list that I asked you to think about, here are some characteristics I would challenge you to assess when you're thinking about who do I include as a developer. So first of all, Monica Higgins and her coworkers have done a lot of studies that show that more is better, right? More developers means that you're going to get promoted faster, that you're going to be happier at work. Literally having one friend at work makes you more happy at work. But having around 3 sponsors also pushes you forward faster in the workplace. So there is certainly a point at which there's so many relationships, it's unwieldy. But having these career-focused relationships is important. When I talk about diversity, I'm not just talking about gender diversity. I'm also talking about functional diversity, diversity of experience. If you work in a big organization, people outside of your department. If you work in a liberal arts position, people in the business school, people in the law school, right? Having relationships across boundaries in terms of diversity. Density is an interesting concept. It's around how interconnected are people. If the 3 of you are in my network and you all know each other, which you probably do because you're sitting next to each other, right? You all have the same information. It's unlikely that you're going to expose me to some new and different information, right? So how interconnected is your network? Do you need some people who have a different perspective to give you access to new information? Mark Granovetter, actually in the 70s, did a great study called The Strength of Weak Ties. And a weak tie is essentially someone who's one person removed from you. And what he found was those people that have networks where there's a lot of distribution in terms of brokerage and access to more weak ties found out about job opportunities more quickly and were more likely to be reemployed quickly after a job loss. And so having diversity and being mindful of how interconnected your network is can serve you well. I will give one caveat that sometimes when you're trying to focus on building an identity, building a personal brand, it does help to have some people who know you well and can bounce ideas off of one another. So your network should ebb and flow depending on what your focus is. How strong are all your ties? This is something I joke about a lot with Kathy Cram, my co-author. When she does her developmental network map, she'll have 20 ties really, really close to her and nobody that's less strong. And what she's found is it takes an enormous amount of her time. Because strong ties are strong relationships, you want to spend more time with those people. And so she's found as she transitions that she has to let some relationships go. And I will tell you that is one of the hardest things to do, right? Is to just keep them in your holiday card list and not have to be calling them on a regular basis. But relationships do ebb and flow. And there is a separation phase for developmental relationships where some people just aren't going to be able to be as helpful, particularly as you move along in your career. So it's okay to let some people go. They're still in your network, they're just not in your developmental network per se. Okay, so how can we help women in particular as we think about development for women? We know that we need to get women more sponsors. Sylvia Ann Hewlett wrote a book, Forget a Mentor, Find a Sponsor. Right? And that's a lot of where Sheryl Sandberg took off for her Lean In agenda. I would argue no. Don't forget your mentors. Get mentors and sponsors. You need both. You need to expand your resources for your career. Relationships that involve interpersonal comfort. There's some wonderful work being done by the University of Michigan. They have a Center for Positive Organizational Psychology, and what they do is they talk about high-quality connections. And the idea is essentially this, that when I have an interaction with you, it is high quality if I leave that interaction feeling energized, feeling a sense of vitality, feeling like I want to interact with more people. If that interaction gives me energy, then it is high quality. So finding those high quality connections and being a high quality connection, giving others energy, helps you generate more developmental relationships. Women face some difficult perceptual barriers to overcome. Belrose Reagan and her colleagues have found that even in a very challenging environment, one that might have ambient discrimination, if you have a strong mentor, that person can help you overcome that challenging environment. And they do it through 3 ways. It's a bigger, broader range of support than just the instrumental psychosocial and role modeling. It actually involves what we'd call holding behaviors. So because women are in the minority, and because we are oftentimes facing some embedded challenges in organizations, we're more likely to have emotionally difficult situations occur. And so one of the holding behaviors involves containment, right? It involves asking good questions and essentially calming your protege or your developee down and containing their reaction to whatever specific event has triggered that challenge. The second thing is empathetic acknowledgement, and essentially what that means is validating that their feelings, their reactions are okay. Sharing some empathy, perhaps providing some examples where you may or may not have experienced something similar, and then taking the next step to help them take action. So that's the enabling piece. Say, this is what you're experiencing. We're going to contain it here in this relationship. I'm going to feel this with you, and then we're going to move forward. That's a lot of interpersonal skill involved in those holding behaviors. But if we can find more high-quality connections that have the capacity for holding behaviors in the network in this room, then we're going to be one step forward to helping women succeed in the workplace. Our learning cycles are getting faster. And so having those relationships to rely on through those transitions and learning cycles means that even when everything else is changing, our relationships are the one thing that can be stable and can keep us grounded and allow us to succeed through all of those transitions. I basically talk about the idea that every single one of us at every stage in our career needs to be an entrepreneurial protege. Taking an entrepreneurial perspective on your career means spending some time to think about what it is I truly want, so knowing yourself, understanding the career landscape, and this is where mentors and sponsors play a particularly important role in helping us navigate that career landscape. Oprah Winfrey, for example, as a mentor, has launched numerous millionaires, right? We have Dr. Phil, Dr. Oz, Nate Berkus, right? She's been a tremendous mentor to so many people. She looks up to Maya Angelou, okay? So paying it forward becomes a theme that we see in the success of people and helping them navigate that career landscape. She opened up the world to Rachel Ray, right? She gave her an audience, right? So not only showing, but perhaps connecting your proteges to that career landscape that they need to move forward with. A relational mindset is so critical in this work that we're doing here today. And we started talking about it at the very beginning around networking and how sitting together, we're getting to know each other. Networking can be a dirty word, right? It makes many of us uncomfortable. And I would challenge you to reframe networking completely and just think about it as building relationships. The more high-quality connections you have in your life, the more likely you're going to be open to meeting those developers that can help you navigate this very challenging career landscape and find those potential developers. Remember I had you at the very beginning make your list? How many people have helped you in the past year or two? How many people in that list have you helped? So a developmental network approach is not only reflecting on my own career and assessing once in a while how my developmental network is fitting my career, experimenting, learning, but also teaching others. Teaching others how important it is to foster these developmental relationships so we can move forward in our careers. I'm actually going to skip and go back to this. I want to talk about some strategies to engage new developers, because we're going to talk about networking a lot, I think, this afternoon. One of the things that's really important on this list, because I think some of it is kind of obvious, is this idea of strategic self-disclosure. That sounds kind of, I don't know, instrumental. It's not. One of the ways that we get to know people better is by sharing something about ourselves. And so if you want to build a closer connection to someone, share something that you're struggling with, that you're working on, that you're trying to improve. It is more likely that they are going to be able to relate to you and actually then know how to help you if you provide them with some self-disclosure. There's a lot of research in psychology that shows us that having some self-disclosure increases the closeness of a relationship. And so one of the fastest ways to network is to share what you're working on. What is that next thing that you're trying to figure out? And ask for advice. People love to talk about themselves. They really do. I was on the plane next to a woman who is also coming home from speaking, and I asked her a couple of questions, and she talked my ear off for almost half an hour. So strategic self-disclosure, I was telling her I was preparing for a talk, and she just went on and on, right? It gives you the opportunity to share something about yourself, share a little bit of vulnerability, share a weakness, and provides people a platform on which they can then reach out to start to help you. So if nothing else, you find a new developer or a new potential mentor from thinking about mentoring in this way, then we've taken one further step to propelling your career. We know that people who have more developers are succeeding at a faster rate. There's a lot of evidence out there that tells us that we want more women and minorities at the top of organizations. Credit Suisse and McKinsey do a big study every year, and they have found repeatedly over the past 5 years that having more women on the board and having more women in the executive suite returns better earnings before taxes, the organizations perform better, and the stock prices go up, right? There's hard data that says it's in everyone's best interest to diversify the C-suite, to diversify corporate boards. The numbers just aren't there yet. And so beyond legislation, what do? We need to change the social structure. Developmental networks, increasing the number of relationships you have that are helping you with your career, are the lowest cost, fastest way for us to start building that social capital for more women to succeed in the corporate workforce. If you need to network to find developers, one way is being here today, right? Visiting interest groups, asking open-ended questions, that strategic self-disclosure, asking the person you're sitting next to, how would they approach it? Following up. Whoever you meet here today, please follow up with them. Please reach out to them via LinkedIn, right? Please add them to your Rolodex somehow in a way that's productive. If you want to meet with them again, set up a meeting. Reach out right now. It's the fastest way to start enlisting new developers. You will hear no. You will hear I don't have time. You have to develop a little bit of a thick skin in order to do this. But when we're talking about building high-quality connections, if you give someone energy, they're more likely to want to re-engage with you. Right? When I meet students in particular that have great ideas, that have read something really interesting, that have fun things going on, then I'm more likely to react. It's always more fun to engage with someone that has more energy than it is to engage with someone who's really stressed out. So let the stress go at the door. And find a place of energy to approach this work from. And make no mistake, it's work. It takes energy to sustain relationships. It takes energy to meet new people. It takes energy to stay in touch with them. But it is entirely worth it. Your career will be better. Not only will your career be better, but you'll make others' careers better as well. I've essentially taken you through the first part of this book. As we talk about analyzing your network, it gets a little bit technical. Don't be afraid. Right? I want you really critically assessing who are my developers, how many, how diverse, do they all know one another, do I need different types of support, are all these people taking too much of my time? I want you to be really critical about it so that you can craft the developmental network that you need to help you move forward in your career.